The chain of events began about 4:30 this morning when a southbound semi jackknifed on a downhill stretch. As it spun, the semi was clipped by a following truck. No one was hurt, but an hour later, as the bushfire brigade hosed spilt fuel from the road, a third truck skidded out of control and hit towing contractor Sandy Philp before cannoning into a heavy tow truck and an oncoming station wagon. Another truck, braking to avoid the crash, also went out of control and rolled off the edge of the road. Philp, who'd been standing with the clean-up crew, suffered serious head and chest injuries and was airlifted to Newcastle's John Hunter Hospital. Last August, Philp, who's known throughout the trucking business as Sandy, ran with a mate into this burning house to rescue the occupants. At the accident scene, a colleague praised his concern for others.
He just yelled out, "Get out of the way." And, mate, I don't know. Sandy, mate, he's always thinking of other blokes, and that's what's happened. He's copped it.
Tonight, Sandy's condition is listed as serious but stable. The Police Accident Investigation Squad has asked the RTA to carry out skid tests on the highway at the accident scene. 2 days ago, the stretch of road was resurfaced, but the RTA says damp weather caused the seal to strip away. The RTA claims signs warning slippery when wet and reduced speed were in place. Late this afternoon, the RTA, worried about how slippery the road is, closed one lane. Jim Sullivan, NBN News.
Work on the new stretch of road at Carryong Hill near Gosford began 3.5 years ago. In the past, motorists have endured delays as they travelled along single lanes of the existing highway west of the city. The old section has been converted to a dual carriageway for traffic leaving Gosford, the new 2.3 kilometre thoroughfare providing 2 lanes into the city. A total of 400,000 cubic metres of sandstone was blasted to make way for the $14 million project that includes a network of catch drains, levee banks and sedimentation ponds to help control erosion. The second and third stage involves major upgrading further along down the existing route between Brisbane Water Drive and Bately Street. Melinda Smith, NBN News. John McDonald says business has always been healthy but has recently boomed at his Central Coast workshop. He says most customers are opting for a more natural alternative, are unhappy with the quality of water from the household tap and are looking to reduce excess water charges. The increasing popularity of rainwater tanks has prompted Wyong Shire Council to make sure certain controls are enforced.
Rainwater tanks which are on the ground, which are 1,000 gallons in the old measurement or 4,000 litres roughly in capacity, don't need a council approval. But those tanks that are on tank stands will require council approval, mainly to make sure that the tank stand is structurally safe.
According to Bob Butt, the bigger the tank, the greater the health risk for domestic users.
We do have some concerns about the health of the community and waterborne diseases. We're asking people to install a first flush system which will flush the water off the roof away from the tank when it starts raining, and also to install mosquito proofing of the tanks to ensure we don't get any large-scale mosquito breeding in the area.
Council says a building application must be lodged for above-ground tanks higher than 1.8 metres. Melinda Smith, NBN News.
Former Australian Davis Cup player John Alexander and his coaching team paid a visit to give 18 members of the region's McDonald's squads a few tips. It's a rare coup for Newcastle, the city the only place in the state to stage the elite clinic. Players aged from 13 to 16 had 6 hours of expert advice. It was hardly hit and giggle, but there were a few close calls. Meanwhile, 44 tennis players from New South Wales schools battled it out at Gosford today to represent the state. The talented youngsters will be pruned down to 8 girls and 8 boys by tomorrow afternoon, who will play in the National Pizzey Cup in Sydney in May. St Pius student Jenny Felch and Sonia Brockington of Katara High are both vying for a spot in the state team. Coincidentally, John Alexander was a representative for the New South Wales Pizzey Cup squad in his school days.
The dead woman, a 60-year-old from Wee Waa, had been employed by Nicholson's Air Service as a spotter, helping in crop dusting operations. She died instantly from head injuries when struck by the left wing of the plane as it was strip spraying chemicals on a property called Wire Lagoon, 8 kilometres to the north of Wee Waa. Her name has not yet been released. Spotters, or flaggers, move along the levees at either end of the paddock, acting as markers to guide the pilot on each run. The accident occurred at 6:45 a.m. and Narrabri detectives spent the morning conducting a number of scientific tests, including photographing the scene from the air. The pilot managed to land his damaged aircraft back at the Nicholson's aerodrome to the south of Wee Waa without further mishap and wasn't injured himself. This afternoon, he and other witnesses were yet to be interviewed by police and no further details were being released. Nicholson's Air Service would not comment on the incident. The Bureau of Air Safety said it will be conducting an inquiry into the matter. A young man was killed in an identical tragedy at Edgeroy near Narrabri 4 years ago. Today's was the third such incident in the cotton growing district in the past 9 years.
Foot and mouth disease has the potential to wipe out an animal population. While the Department of Agriculture is trying to keep it out of the country, a virus by a similar name is affecting humans. It's known as the hand, foot and mouth disease, but it's not life-threatening.
It's quite different, and it can be a very devastating disease in animals, but fortunately it doesn't cause problems in humans.
The outbreak seems to be confined to children under the age of 10. The symptoms include unsightly ulcers on the body.
It shows itself in the form of ulcers in the mouth and mostly on the sides of the cheeks and the side of the tongue.
It can also appear on their hands, feet and bottom. The symptoms only last for a few days and go away without treatment. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Constable Doug Eaton was shot dead in April 1977 during an armed robbery at the Toronto Bowling Club. His partner, Constable Edward Gill, was wounded. Police arrested Nicola Glesick and his 2 sons, Wally and Danny. They were all sentenced to double life imprisonment. But in 1989, Danny and Wally were released from Long Bay Jail. What followed was unprecedented outrage among police. They called a day of action to protest against the early release. Now the Police Association has warned of similar action if their father, Nicola, is let out of jail.
If they do decide to release it, we as a union would be most unhappy because it's one of our members that were murdered and another one of our members that was shot at the same time with an attempt to murder. He was given 2 life sentences, and we feel that a man given 2 life sentences, particularly for murdering a police officer, should do more than 15 years imprisonment.
Nicola Glesick will be considered for early release by the Serious Offenders Board next month. His minimum 15.5-year sentence expires on Saturday. And it's not only the Glesick case which is of serious concern to the Police Association. It appears that a 36-year-old man who murdered a German hitchhiker near Raymond Terrace in 1981 could also be freed from jail as early as next month. Neil Wayne Hunwick was sentenced to life imprisonment for murdering 21-year-old Bernd Assmann. His body was found dumped beside the Pacific Highway. Justice Smart today set a minimum jail term of 12 years for Hunwick, which could see him released in just a few weeks.
Coal might seem to be just coal, but in fact every batch has different properties, and overseas buyers are more and more wanting to know exactly what they're buying, which is why a project dubbed Smart Lab could prove so important to Australia. In this small lab in Carrington, a consortium involving BHP Coal and Oakbridge is turning technology developed by the CSIRO into a powerful tool for analysing the organic properties of coal in a very short time. To date, principals of those organisations were shown how it works. It uses nuclear magnetic resonance, which might sound complicated, but it is simple in its application. Inside this device, a tiny sample of coal is heated to 450 degrees centigrade and placed between two magnets, which line up all the hydrogen particles in the coal, just like little bar magnets. A radio wave then deflects the hydrogen and repeats the process 50 times in 10 minutes. Computers can then read the reaction of the hydrogen particles to provide an insight into just how that piece of coal might behave in, say, a coke oven. Director of the project is Dr. Tom Calcott.
Eventually all the coals in Australia can be analysed this way, and it can do it very rapidly and fast and reliably.
Smart Lab was officially opened by Professor Alvin Lynch of Queensland University. The export of coking coal alone is worth billions of dollars to Australia, and Smart Lab's backers believe that device may ultimately have a role to play in maintaining that share of that market for Australia. Perhaps it's also proof that there is some pride in a tonne of coal. Jim Sullivan, NBN News.
At Swansea, and surf clubs from all over Newcastle competed in the annual Stella Kappa Carnival. Each club entered a mixed team of 16. In the combined beach sprint, boaties were up against established runners, making baton changes often less than graceful. In the belt swim, the home club proved to be the better coordinated and raced away with the lead, easily claiming the title. The waves weren't as big as those on the Gold Coast, taking the thrills and spills out of the race, but ensuring the strongest boat crews won.
The rodeo was the highlight of the Wingham show. A competitive field entertained the crowd. Youth was no barrier, but it didn't guarantee success. The daytime activities featured the judging of the Bradford beef cattle. Show jumping events took up much of the weekend. Sideshow Alley offered those who wanted it a little fun. The Wingham show finished last night with a fireworks display.
2 days before 50 miners set off on their march to Sydney, the men were planning how to tackle the 160-kilometre trek and how to convince Pacific Power to approve their proposal to lease Newvale Colliery. At this morning's meeting, commemorative T-shirts were tried on for size, itineraries were handed out, and the importance of the march was driven home. The miners say they've tried to negotiate with Pacific Power about the commercial viability of reopening Newvale and saving their jobs, but now they have to resort to hitting the road.
It's really just to raise attention to our cause and to the cause of the unemployment in Newcastle.
The men assert Pacific Power was supposed to give them an answer to their proposal on Friday, but the reply never came.
They're too frightened to do that for some reason. They just keep continually saying, look, we'll look at it, we'll look at it, we'll look at it. And I think what they set out to do in the first place was to get these people to a position where they would get bored with it, they would walk away from it and they would fade into insignificance. Well, unfortunately, they took on 50-odd people that just aren't going to do that.
This afternoon, the miners have been meeting with State Opposition Leader Bob Carr in Sydney to try and ensure they have the ALP support when they arrive on Parliament House's steps next Tuesday. Scott Bevan, NBN News.
The idea behind Barefoot is quite simple. Whoever manages to stand longest wins. A howling southerly wind chopped the surface of the lake up, making conditions extremely difficult. The waves made it hard to step off, but when they did get up, they were almost swallowed up in the spray. The one-on-one races proved the most spectacular and often painful for some competitors. Branxton skier Peter McClung took out the title, staying up for 3 minutes and 51 seconds. Natalie Maybury collected the ladies' trophy. The day's racing also was a fundraiser to help the skiers build a new clubhouse. Just a few hours after touching down and Carl Sullivan was in Newcastle, pacing out the ring, or as he says, putting his war dance into first gear. While his body may have been warming up, his mouth was in top gear already, and he didn't waste any time laying a verbal bootload into his opponent, Troy Waters.
Well, they said his name was Troy Waterfalls, and he will fall in the 5th round. I'm born hyped up. When you get in the ring, we'll see who's a pussy.
Sullivan calls himself the assassin, but the killing fields have been pretty quiet for him lately. His last fight was in September, and since then he's had a number of operations on his hands. Sullivan's trainer and coach missed the plane yesterday, along with the other American fighter due to meet Spike Chaney. However, Chaney felt no remorse about the American's dilemma and sparred a few rounds with local boxer Lance Hobson this afternoon. Hobson will take on a Filipino on Friday night and relish the opportunity to pick up some speed skills from Chaney. It's expected the rest of the American contingent will arrive tomorrow, giving them less than 3 days to prepare. Darren Curtis, NBN News.
At 84, Arthur Collinson from Lambton still enjoys to dance.
Very nice, yes. I don't come very often, but a little bit out of practice, but I'm still having a good time.
The ball was held as part of Senior Citizens Week. Judges spent the afternoon scrutinising participants' skill and style.
From the senior citizens' point of view, we don't sort of look at the age or the beauty. We just look at the ability of gracefully moving around the dance floor.
Roadside litter is a problem most people contribute to and one everyone can have a hand in stopping. The Environment Protection Authority has launched a campaign to target those who insist on throwing rubbish out the car window. Its theme, Roadside Litter, You're in the Driver's Seat. So far, representatives from the EPA's litter unit have visited 13 locations around the state. They're interested in finding out just where the problem areas are and ways litter can be reduced.
I think if people realise that litter has an impact on wildlife, it can cause bushfires, it's got all these other things that normally most Australians would be very concerned about. If they associate litter with those impacts, then I think they'll think twice about throwing litter out the car window.
In Newcastle City, fast food outlets were mentioned as contributing to the litter problem.
One of the good ideas that came out was point of sale promotion. That is putting up posters and little reminders to consumers that when they've finished that ice cream and when they've finished that lolly, that they don't just ditch it out the window.
Today, the scene of last night's tragedy was covered over while police investigated the fire. 41-year-old Stephen Bullpitt's caravan was parked beside this house in Breen Street, Stockton. Police believe he returned to his van at 11 last night. In the early hours of the morning, it burst into flames. Shortly after 2 a.m, neighbours heard screams from the burning caravan. The man's 18-year-old son tried to douse the flames, but it was too late. Police and fire units were soon on the scene.
On arrival at those premises, a 41-year-old deceased male person was found in the caravan. The matter will be the subject of a coronial inquiry.
One theory is a cigarette could have ignited the blaze. Today, friends rallied around the family. Neighbours say Bullpitt was a character who loved to go fishing and have a beer with his mates. Peter Ryan, NBN News.
Inside, you'll find a fascinating display marking the 75th anniversary of the Newcastle Philatelic Society, a group which has not missed holding a monthly meeting since it was established at the end of the First World War. Don Catterall admits he hasn't attended them all, but has been to more meetings than anybody else, alive or dead. And Don also makes another admission, one that some disrespectful, non-philatelistic type people might not find surprising.
If you just collected the definitive stamps of each country, it'd be very boring, so you collect everything related to it, postal stationery, that's telegrams and all things like that, yeah.
And the range on display here at the Hunter Heritage Centre would truly amaze you.
Aircraft and penguins and balloons, beautiful stamps that have been made precisely for people to collect because they're so attractive. And there are revenue stamps, Cinderella stamps, that's stamps that are tax stamps or duty stamps.
As well, you could become enveloped in a lot of postal history, from first day covers and commemorations of special events to a look at the postal service in the early days, when the postie took on a more militaristic look. But be quick, the display will be dismantled come 5 o'clock tomorrow.
The Newcastle side have met several times this week and spent hours on boosting their fitness. Coach Carl Hutchinson has had the boys repeatedly sprinting in an effort to help them pick up those quick metres. The Newcastle team is a mix of experienced players, including South Newcastle's Trevor Crowe, and a host of younger players who have spent time in the Knights' ranks. One thing the Newcastle boys did continually rehearse was their kicking game. On the Central Coast, former Balmain firebrand David Brooks will captain a side of youngsters, among them hard-hitting forward Justin Kidd. At training last night, the Coasties concentrated on run-around plays. They kept at it until it became almost second nature. The game is set down for the Curry Sports Ground, with first grade due to get underway at 3 o'clock.
Conditions at Newcastle Beach were minuscule once again, making wave selection critical. World champion Wendy Botha was eliminated in the semi-finals by North Coaster Nerida Falconer, while Pam Burridge qualified for the decider with a decisive win over Kingscliff's Kylie Webb. The final was a seesawing affair, with the lead changing constantly. Burridge hit the front by just half a point with only minutes remaining, then used her wave priority to full effect. It was enough to block Falconer's momentum and give Burridge her second Surfest crown by the narrowest of margins. Despite her win, the former world champ has no intention of shelving her plans for semi-retirement.
Certainly not after the first event, but even if I do go on to have a really successful Australian assault, I don't think I'll be running off on the world tour again.
Earlier in the day, Newcastle's Dave MacArthur had his dream run stopped in round 4. Clubmate Matt Hoy progressed to the quarterfinals. Bruce McKenzie, NBN News.
Members of the Volunteer Rescue Association gathered to discuss how the service operates and the latest rescue techniques.
Conference has been one of our most successful conferences that the VRA has held in its 24-year history. There's some over 160 members that have come from all parts of New South Wales.
The main focus of the conference was the work of the 2 rescue helicopters based in Lismore and Newcastle. The 2 choppers cover the mid-north coast. Barry Walton is a full-time crew member with the Hunters Rescue Chopper.
The basic reason we're here is to talk to the people that are associated with rescue work and helicopter operations in general around accident scenes. They see us fly in quite a bit with ambulance paramedics, and it's the cooperation that is needed both on the ground and in the air that makes 2 bodies work together so well.
The rescue helicopters play vital roles in both search and rescue and medical evacuations. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
For weeks, competitors have been dieting and watching how much water they drank to make sure they had only bare muscle showing. This afternoon it was time to shave off the body hair and rub on litres of baby oil. It's the 11th Newcastle Classic and is regarded as the highlight on the local bodybuilding calendar. However, numbers were down this year due to injuries. In fact, injuries meant there were no female competitors. The heats are still underway at the Newcastle Workers Club, with the final scheduled for later tonight.
When the 40 New Vale miners and their supporters arrived at Parliament House yesterday, hope of success was high, but postponement of their meeting with the Premier till early evening dampened spirits, and plans for a New Vale revival were dealt another blow with a negative response in Parliament from Energy Minister Gary West. He said, "Pacific Power advised me that the third and latest bid by Alliance Investments to lease New Vale mine should be rejected on the grounds it's not commercially or financially viable. I agree, the deal is not commercial and should not be consummated." However, once the miners' meeting with Premier Fay, Mr West and Assistant Treasurer George Souris got underway, new hope began to emerge. An alternative to the miners' third proposal was discussed. Pacific Power was concerned the miners' second proposal would leave a $1.4 million shortfall. According to the miners' consultant Ron McCulloch, this shortfall could be made up through some operational cost cutting and the royalties plus payroll tax paid by the mine.
We offered to exchange coal with them effectively. We would sell them coal for the Vales Point Power Station and buy back off them coal at Newstand Mine.
Mr McCulloch says this would save the costs of having to pay to haul the coal to Newcastle for export.
I think we could have a favourable report from the Premier. I think there's a light at the end of the tunnel somehow.
Mr Armstrong says the Premier is now considering the alternative proposal. A reply is expected within the next few days.
It's not the handy banks that are the problem, it's the practices of people whilst they're at the banks that we find can be a problem.
A 19-year-old Cooks Hill man became the hapless victim of a cash card teller robbery in the Hunter Mall. The man was approached as he made a withdrawal from the teller machine. Police say another man aged about 20 of Aboriginal appearance demanded money. When it was refused, a scuffle broke out. The victim received a solid blow to the face. A passerby stepped in, the attacker fled, but it was then realised that the man's automatic teller card was missing. A search of the victim's account has yet to reveal whether a withdrawal was made with the missing card. Police say there are simple precautions to follow to minimise the risk of becoming a target.
Don't use them around midnight and 2 a.m. and that. Obviously people that use the banks about that time are making a withdrawal and could make themselves a target. Use one that's well lit. Go there with a friend if necessary. And whilst they're making the transaction and the transaction's in progress, don't stand there with the head down tucked into the handy bank. Stand back whilst the transaction's in progress and be aware of what's around you.
The Lochinvar Equestrian Centre is up for sale, and it's believed there's pressure on the state government to buy the facility as part of Sydney's bid for the Olympics in the year 2000. If Sydney wins, Eastern Creek will be the site for the equestrian events, but Lochinvar could be a backup facility. The centre hosts some of the country's premier equestrian events, and today a number of Australia's best riders were battling it out for a place in the 3-day Matt Ryan Double Gold Classic. Leading the field is Matt Ryan himself. All up, 31 horses will compete. Today was dressage.
What we want to see is a horse and rider working totally together as a team. It's a little bit like the Torval and Dean on ice, where it's rhythm and balance. We want to see everything in harmony.
Jeff Harley is one of 3 judges overseeing the competition. Tomorrow the horses will be put through a cross-country course, and on Sunday, show jumping.
It's always a courageous horse that wins, and a courageous horse can be helped a lot by a courageous rider. We've proved that in Barcelona. Our standard here at this event for today has been excellent.
Jodie McKay, NBN News.